Hello and welcome to Doubles and Trebles. Thanks for joining us again. This is the second of our Inside Betting mini-series on the channel here with Foxpunter owner Mike Holden. Hopefully you've watched the first video where we talked to Mike about his background and his interests and how he kind of ended up in the betting sphere and stuff. So if you haven't watched that one, do go back and take a look. This is going to be a little bit more in-depth with the betting side of things, talking about edges and finding the edge. And there will be a couple of videos after this. So hopefully you're enjoying this mini-series if you are watching it. If you are enjoying it, please do drop us a comment and a like and hit that subscribe button if you enjoy our content. We're trying to, constantly grow and widen the community we have over on Doubles and Trebles. So it'd be great to have you on board. Mike, good to have you here again. And I guess we'll dive straight in with it. So edges. I'm just going to give a little bit of a summary of edges in betting for anyone who's not familiar with the term, because you really should be, to be honest. For anyone who doesn't know what I'm referring to when I talk about an edge, it basically refers to finding bets that have a higher probability of happening than their odds may suggest. And then the process of holding an edge, we would probably say, is being able to find those bets on a consistent basis using a method that you can kind of reapply, an edge that an advantage, if you will, that you hold over the market and the other people playing that market. So I guess the most obvious one in recent years has been the application of data in football. Things like XG that I'm sure you'll be familiar with if you're viewing. We also have things in for the golf viewers, the strokes gained statistics that people band around. But we also have things in racing with sectional times. I know the time for guys like to deep dive into the stats on the racing side of things. You could have a really finite knowledge in your particular niche that could count as an edge. So anyway, you get the picture. I feel like I've summarized that nicely, but I want to dive in with data if I can first, Mike, because that was kind of your bread and butter when you were writing for Oddschecker and Sporting Life and Racing Post and the like. So can you just talk to us a little bit about when you were first able to use data as an edge and how effective it was in that early period?
Well, I've always had a head for numbers, I guess. And I've just always been fascinated by tables and form guides, but trying to create new ones, basically. So always trying to create new metrics is essentially what it is. So, because that other people aren't looking at that. So if you can, the more metrics you can create, rather than just following metrics that are already out there, then I believe that's how you achieve an edge is to create something new that hasn't existed before. Because I think if anything that already exists, then other people are using it by definition. And if you can find ways to create new metrics that just apply to something that you're particularly interested in, and you might follow a football match for particular reasons. Like me, for example, football managers are my bread and butter. I've always looked at football matches through the perspective of football managers and tried to understand the different leadership styles and stuff like that. So for me, it's much better to create statistics around managers' data as opposed to team data. I've always I don't look at football as teams and seasons. I look at football as managers and tenures. So when a manager comes in at one club, it's the start of a new tenure. And whatever behaviours that team had before that manager arrived, just expect them to change in accordance with a new manager from this point forward. So it's like everything I measure is generally, is geared towards that. So that's kind of how I would describe how you might use statistics as an edge. It's just deciding what it is that you're particularly interested in, and something that you're going to be, constantly wanting to get into flow with because you just enjoy it so much for the sake of doing it. Then how can you create metrics around that thing it is that you enjoy doing? Because I think what a lot of people tend to do is they try to see the end in mind of what they're doing, and it's hard to sit down and dedicate all this time, all this focus time into developing these new metrics around something that you don't even know what's going to be at the end of it. And it's like you don't even know what you're looking for. You've just got to trust that the profits will eventually emerge if you put the hours in and you keep going down the same path. It's like I sometimes use this analogy of drilling for oil that I read somewhere. It's better to drill down in one place 500 meters than 100 meters in 5 different places, because you might never strike oil. But if you drill in one place for 5 years, so it's about that level of focus and going deep on one particular subject. If there's one thing in the world that purely suited to you, that you just know you love this, and every time you do get the opportunity to sit down at the computer or whatever and study this thing, that's probably where your edge is going to lie. And what you've got to do is try to create something new out of your understanding, because if I mean, just looking at it from a personality level, if you're doing something that's to your flow state and something that you're just effortlessly good at, then by definition, so many percentage of the population, even if you tried, would never be as good as you. And then even if someone of the same personality type came to do the same thing a year later, well, they'll only be where you were a year ago in a year's time. You'll be a year ahead of them because you're still doing the thing, you know. So that's kind of that's the way I see it. It's just about sticking to what you're really passionate about, and not being distracted too much by the noise of what other people have got to say or other opinions, and the mainstream media especially, you know, we're talking about social media being a distraction, and then the next biggest thing is mainstream media is a distraction. Because they've got to create stories out of non-stories all the time. It's what the business is. Now, if you're paying attention to every story that passes on, you know, in football, you know, you just for starters, you just taking on board all the same information that the crowd are. But also, most of them stories are meaningless anyway. So it's just a lot of wasted time and effort. Whereas if you can create your own new knowledge that didn't exist before you found it, that's where an edge is, right there, and that's the source of it.
I'm nodding my head massively there, Mike. I agree with virtually every word you've just said. I wouldn't necessarily create metrics by any means, but certainly specialise. Sometimes can feel like my detriment, but in the long term, for example, on racing, don't do jumps whatsoever. I wouldn't do a race over further than 1.5 miles. Concentrate massively on the Group 1s and the classics and the anti-post that goes with them. So yeah, I'm learning on the spot here, but yeah, well, possibly.
I think you could say wider, on the wider context with the way we do the darts as well. I mean, you know, we spend so much time talking about darts, the players, you know, the form, all the different aspects of it. I would dare say we spend more time than 99% of people who punt on darts talking about it. So I just feel like that has created an edge in itself for us. You know, sometimes we'll see a market appear and we'll text each other and say, look, that's a wrong price, you know, that's a wrong price, you know. We've hit a few, you know, good winners on the channel purely through that. And I think you're right. I totally agree with what you're saying about, you know, focusing hard on something you're really passionate on. And I think we've probably reaped the rewards of that without realizing it.
And similar to darts, a few years ago, definitely not now for myself, was massive into boxing and the betting on it. And the times have changed in the bookmaking industry, but back in the day, the likes of boxing and darts did not have a full-time trader sitting in Stoke, Leeds, Warrington, Gibraltar, wherever it may be, because you would not get 40 hours out of someone trading boxing. Full stop, you wouldn't. So, you know, the lad covering the Dogs or the Rugby League might also be doing the boxing. And at the time, and like I say, certainly not now, I was confident that I knew more about the main events, probably not, but the undercard fights, I was confident that I knew more about the prices and the boxers in that matchup than the person pricing it up in Gibraltar did. And, you know, maybe that was an edge as well. But yeah, in your opinion, Mike, when do you know an edge has like kind of ran its course? Did you get to a point with data whereby it was no longer effective as what it used to be? And how long would you stick with what you thought was an edge through a rough patch, for example, before moving on?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, because I think most of what I'm doing now is designed to try to never lose this edge, if you know what I mean, and to certainly get a lot longer out of it by understanding what it is a little bit more than I ever used to. So my first edge, if we go back to the early Betfair years, was just pure intuition. It's what I'm doing now, but with absolutely no structure to it. It was just hunches. I was just playing hunches, and I think a lot of people who knew me at the time knew that, yeah, this guy has good hunches. Don't always believe everything that he's saying, and
I feel like I'm in that stage now.
Yeah,
personally, I do.
Yeah. And sometimes you just have these you have these random bad calls as well. It all goes part and parcel because there's no structure, there's no framework that you're working to, because you can't actually capture and hold on to what it is that you're actually doing right and when it is that it's not working right. And that was my first edge, was using intuition on what was probably by today's terms, I mean, if you could go back now 16, 17 years and play on Betfair, you'd be amazed at how many wrong prices there probably were in those days. But that was, it was the foremost platform at the time, and some of the best minds were on there, and still there was loads and loads of lapses all over the show because our knowledge has come on so much. So that was intuition was my first edge. But then my second edge was 2012, 13 time, developed my own rating system, using shot data, applying the principles of what we now know as XG, following on from the Moneyball story, a bit late to the party to make real money, but enough to make. I had a really good year working for a syndicate, and did really well out of it. And even for a year was putting up tips on Oddschecker and stuff that were doing really well, and landing lots of big prize winners, and everybody was really excited. Big social media buzz around it and stuff like that. So that second edge, I now was a bit more measured because it was ratings based. So there was numbers to it. I could actually see something concrete that told me that my edge was diminishing. Again, it's one of those things where you're kind of looking back in time and applying the logic afterwards. So I'm talking now as if I knew what was going on every step of the way, when I probably didn't, but now I'm rationalizing it after the event. But basically, it was just evident in the numbers. I smashed it up for about 12 months, 18 months, betting on Molly Bet, but betting with the bookmakers, and then just all sort of different things. Even the anti-post betting, it was really helping me on that as well. And then it just became more of a grind. I was let go by the syndicate because they had a bad 6 months. You kind of just, because you don't know exactly what it was that you were doing right, and you just want to play everything. The problem with a good rating system is if it wins so consistently for a certain period of time, you're not, on some level, you need to discern, as from a human level, what the computer's not always right, kind of thing. The numbers aren't always right. There's going to be some stinkers in there, and you've got to be able to. And I think what happened was I arrived at a point where I was just trusting. I was losing faith in myself and trusting the system more than myself. And so then I kind of hit. You win for a certain period of time, and then you do so much of it back. So you win for 18 months, and then you have a bad 6 months where you do most of it back. You're still ahead overall, but then that's your time to take stock and regroup, and then that's when your edge is gone. So that's the first warning sign that your edge is gone, is that the glory 18 months or whatever's passed now, and now it's time to sober up and work out what it is that you were doing right and what you were doing wrong. So that's when I start doing consultancy work, sharing my ratings with bookmakers, trading rooms, and then I started Foxpunter and as a subscription service. So then I'm still making a profit using these ratings, but I'm not smashing it up. But there's also a nice little side income coming in through sharing them and as a subscription and stuff like that. But gradually over time, I've just seen the edge get lower and lower, not necessarily in real time, but you look back on your numbers, I've kind of reached a point. I mean, only 2 years ago I was looking at the ratings. That was a real sort of sobering moment, was about 2 years ago in 2019. Kind of instinctively always knew this, but I look back on my numbers year on year, and you could just see the edge dropping. Yeah, and I've kind of mapped this out in terms of if you can almost plot it out as the Moneyball book being released in 2005, Benham and Bloom smashing it up late 2000s, and you think every year how many people were inspired by that Moneyball book to go to university and do a quant degree or do a data science degree. And then every year the market's being flooded by new people coming out of university with all these new skills, thinking I'm going to apply this to betting because I can't get a job in football, and it's getting bigger and bigger. And then 2017, it's on Match of the Day XG. It's game over at that point. When Match of the Day starts talking about XG, XG is not going to be your edge any longer. It's as simple as that. And so it's been a progressive thing. And I've always instinctively knew after that sobering period where you do so much of your money back, and then you have to start finding new ways to make it pay less but still pay. But then when you're not making as much money as you was year on year, even if it doesn't hit home, that you've got to park this thing and push it to the side. For me, that was two years ago, I think. 2019 is just like, right, it's the data now. I see it as XG has basically replaced league tables. XG tables have replaced league tables, and XG form guides have replaced form guides. It's just the new tables and form guides of what we used to see 20 years ago, as you know. So that's been the big shift. It was an edge for people for so long, over say the first 10 years. The last 10 years, it's been an edge that's just diminishing all the time, and it's now become a tool that replaces what used to be league tables and form guides.
I want to ask you about XG while you're on it, Mike, because I don't like to drill it down too much into a specific sport, because we obviously cover a range of stuff on this channel, but I don't want to upset any XG lovers watching, but I can honestly say it's never really been one for me. And I think I'm getting a little bit of an understanding as we have this conversation of why that is. I think I just always felt like it was an oversold set of data that everyone had access to, and it used to really irk me when someone would tell me, oh yeah, no, but you got that. I mean, if you have a look at the XG, you'll see that what you're saying is wrong, and it used to really bother me, and I used to get my back up about it. And I think I now realize it is because what you were saying, you know, when everybody has access to it, that statistic no longer becomes as powerful as it once was. I always see it personally as that having an XG, for example, and it's very much what you described with the Foxpunter service, having that as one tool at your disposal out of many, you know, and basing your decisions off all of them and checking it against these ones before you decide a solid selection seems to be the way to go. Do you think that it is important to consider multiple approaches when you're hunting value, or can you be profitable off just XG, or I guess in your case, just profiling, or do you have to then bounce it off against your ratings, bounce it off against your numbers, or do you just sometimes just go down that one line?
Yeah, I do think you have to bounce it off different things. I think all my metrics are generally XG based anyway, but I try to create my own metrics out of XG. So I'll have, you know, manager XG performance tables and things like that, and track, you know, according to managers in different situations and stuff, you know, so game state or whatever it might be. So it's a tool, you know. That's basically the way I see it now. There was a period when anybody who understood XG, and I can go back to when I did really well with the ratings in that period. My model wasn't sophisticated. It was just my model, and I understood it, and it was ahead of, you know. So people now will be preaching about the right and wrongs of XG, and well, no, you're wrong, you see, because you don't understand the data. They'll have a model that's a million times more sophisticated than the one I had, but the time for an edge with XG has got, you know, so that they will struggle to make even a fraction of what I made with what was a really basic model. But I was doing something that most other people weren't doing at the time, and essentially I was getting in earlier ahead of the big money as well on a Saturday. I was able to get my bets down, you know, on Friday afternoon, Saturday mornings, before the big syndicates with the best XG models arrived on Saturday afternoon. So, you know, these are the kind of dynamics at play. The XG itself is not going to be the thing, and certainly not now, because everybody's aware of what XG is. But you can use XG as a tool to help you arrive at your metrics that are just specific to you or specific to a small group of people. So that's kind of like with Foxpunter, you know, I share XG ratio tables in certain formats, and it's not because this is the answer that's going to solve any questions, but I've created the tables in such a way that I've created tables so that what you're looking at is always what you're looking at. So if it's a 16 match sample and you always gravitate to the 16 match samples or the 8 match samples, then you just begin to see things in those tables that other people won't see if they're looking at different tables. So there could be 16 different subscribers looking at 16 different tables of a weekend, and if they're always studying the same table, they will see their own things that no one else knows. Do you know what I'm saying? And the tables are designed so that, for example, they always average to 2.5 goals. So you can check how good one team was against the team 3 years ago, or it always means the same thing. It's not about just how good are West Brom, how good is their attacking output right now. What does that really matter? What does it mean? I want to know how good are West Brom relative to the division. How good is their attacking output relative to the average of the division? And just present this kind of information in really simple ways, not to give you the answers that I then go and make my decisions on, but to consult. I come up with the opinions first, or formulate my take on a particular game or my angle that I'm coming at it from, and then just say, okay, what does the data tell me? And as much as anything, I think I think it's wanting the data disprove me. It's not, and it's not the data that makes the final decision. It's the data that tells me, okay, you've not considered this. Here's something. This would have been a blind spot if you'd have just gone straight to market with your opinion and not looked at the tables first. Then it's a bit of a check and balance type process that you're just keeping yourself in check a little bit. That you're not just going straight to market with what might be a crazy opinion. When you look at the recent data, there's absolutely no foundation for what you're thinking. So I kind of use it as a tool that way to try and correct myself as much as anything, I think.
Yeah, we often look at the anti-post markets, whether that be darts or horses on here, trying to, anticipate the future movements and stuff, similar to what you're doing with Foxpunter, really, like you say, on a Monday to a Saturday, how the market moves. Just on the profiling as an edge, without giving away too much, obviously, but how did you first start applying that to the sports world? Because, like I say, I've never really heard it done before. So, how do you apply it to the sports world on a daily basis, pretty much?
Well, I think I've always done this on some level. I just never understood what it was that I was doing years ago. And there was a lot of... So again, we talk about using the tables to correct yourself and using XG data to put yourself off the bad bets as opposed to point you in the direction of bets or, to confirm what it is you want to confirm. Well, it's the same now. I've got a framework with profiling that basically I'm trying to weed out all the bad ideas I was having previously. So I'm just left with the good ideas at the end of it all, and all the patterns I've noticed over the years of how certain managers behave in certain situations. So it's trying to weed out all the bad information that's in there, and that's what the framework does. So it's just lots of different ways, really. It can be, some managers are just risk averse because of their personality. So you can turn around and say, okay, are they more likely to play unders, go unders on matches and be low scoring and cagey encounters? And, there's all different ways in which managers can be understood about how they take risks, about the ways that they learn, or what information matters to them and what doesn't matter to them. So you can kind of guess when they're going to react in a certain way and when they won't react at all because it's just not on their radar. The way they make decisions, are they motivators or are they logical type managers that basically just they can have brilliant ideas, but if they've got a dressing room that's, they come into a dressing room that's just had a really manager, a motivational type emotional manager that the players used to connect with, are they going to take to this new guy? Are they going to connect with him as good as he is at what he does? So there's all these different dynamics. Managerial changes is a good one because that's just a complete full stop on that team's storyline. It's a complete change of chapter, yet the market won't change in its opinion of that team, or it'll be virtually imperceptible how the team changes from the final game of the previous manager to the first game of the next manager.
As a case in point, last year with Chelsea, exactly the same squad. I don't really follow it closely, but Lampard goes out the door, Tuchel comes in, they win the goddamn Champions League with basically the same squad. I bet that was a fascinating case in point for yourself and the community you work with, I'm sure.
It was interesting. Funnily enough, it was interesting because Lampard and Tuchel are very similar types, very similar type managers.
Did you already have Tuchel profiled before he came on board? I know he was at Paris, was it? Not
beforehand. It probably took me it's probably about 3 or 4 weeks after he took charge.
Right, okay, yeah.
Profiled him. So it was. But yeah, they go about the job in different ways. So you can still make sense of it, even though it's two managers of very similar personality types. You can still make sense of the difference between one and the other, but a lot of it comes down to experience in that case. Frank Lampard's had one season in the Championship with Derby. Thomas Tuchel's managed it in a Champions League final with PSG last year. The fact that he was in last year's final was a massive thing for him in this year's final in terms of experience, and he's had all these years in Germany prior to that as well. So, part of my thinking for much of last season was, as much as the players seemed to be more bought into Tuchel than they were under Lampard, the underlying data wasn't massively changing all that much, or certainly results were, when when it caught up with Tuchel and West Brom beat them 5-2, for example, and then there was a bit of regression there towards the end of the season. You look at 2 halves of the season and they weren't all that different, but there was clearly something different happening in terms of the buy-in. And I think it was mostly the foreign players that had just got, like, there's a lot of players there last season, or a handful of players that had just arrived in the country. Now, it's really difficult in the Premier League in your first season to adapt as a foreign player playing in the league for the first time. And I think those players that had come from the German league and were new to the Premier League welcomed Tuchel with open arms, and there was not necessarily that connection with Frank Lampard, whereas Lampard probably had the connection more with your Mason Mounts and those type players. So, you know, there was dynamics there that weren't actually necessarily personality profiling dynamics, but just from studying the 2 managers, knowing the backgrounds and things like that.
Yeah, it just shows there is an awful lot of ways you can go with this kind of stuff, I guess. And one thing that fascinates me with edges such as yours is kind of working out, and I think you touched on it previously, what information is important and what isn't. Because, I mean, there's a million different ways you can go at these kind of things. And we're talking about manager interviews and stuff like that. But, I mean, are you very careful in where you take your information in from, for example? Because I'm thinking about, you know, talking about edges in football and stuff like that. As someone who supports a lower league football team, I'm thinking about, would you look at the likes of a fan message board to try and get, you know, that additional bit of information on player fitness or likely team selection or rumours, whatever, or is that pointless information? Would you specifically only look at the radio interview? Would you not even delve into the Sunday papers, for example? I mean, how do we cut out the fat and decide what is important in terms of consumption?
This has been a massive area for me in the last few years. This has been about trying to hone what my edge is and get the purest information possible. And for me, it's from the horse's mouth. It's those post-match interviews with managers, 15 minutes after a full-time whistle, where they can't disguise how they're feeling about something, or, you know, they're just microphone straight in front of them. They just say what sort, you know, and some say more than others, but if you understand the personality types, then you can read into what it is that they're saying. Yeah, I mean, you talk about message boards. The problem is not necessarily pointless, because you go on the message boards and you can have some absolutely brilliant posters who give you so much insight, but there's a lot of noise surrounding it as well. So you have to know where your signals are. There's a good model that I use. Talk about mental models. There's a good mental model I use to try to determine this. It's called the Dikw Pyramid. And the Dikw stands for data, information, knowledge, wisdom. And basically, if you can learn to categorize places where you go for your information, on the first level, you got data, which is just, it doesn't tell you anything. It's just data. You know, it's like you just can get lost in the data just studying too much data. In and of itself, individual data points don't mean anything. Information is the next level, where that data is kind of put together to make some sort of applied meaning to it. So here's a collection of data, and this is what we think it means. That's just information. Then knowledge is like where you begin to get into the realms of signal. This is actually, you know, information could be anything. You talk about the media, and media will just write stories about anything. They're constantly churning out information because they've got to fill pages and columns every day. And even if it's nothing to report, they'll report something. So there's so much noise and not so much signal. But knowledge is where you get into the realms of signal, and finding your sources of pretty much everything you hear or listen to or read is signal. It's helpful information. And then wisdom is basically at the end, where wisdom is almost like being able to map different types of knowledge. Like me using mental models now, I've got all this random knowledge, and the way to turn it into wisdom is to apply it to mental models. So by using, you know, generational theory alongside manager profiling and understanding how cycles work, and how, you know, that maybe the connection we just talked about Lampard and Tuchel, the connection between German players and English players, and you know, you just start to piece together these different, and then that becomes wisdom at that level. So for me, the best place for knowledge is managers' post-match interviews, because all that happens to the media is they take that post-match interview, a manager might give you 600, 800 words in a post-match interview, and even the local media will get rid of 400 of those words and then build an article around it. So they're filtering. It's second-hand information now. It's just what the reporter thinks more than what the manager thinks. And some of the stuff is left out. So some of the best gold off a manager is in the last 2 minutes of the interview when he's getting impatient and he just wants to go, and he lets out some of his emotions, or he might just say something flippantly. And then you're getting that manager at his real source. You're really getting what he really thinks when he just drops his guard and just, at the end of an interview is sometimes some of the best insights. So you're getting that straight from the horse's mouth, and that won't even make the cut of what goes into the local reporter's, summary on a Monday, or, so for me, that's purely, the social media is probably, the noisiest place, the hardest place to find a signal. Then mainstream media, but the closer you get to the source of what it is you're trying to understand. And if I'm trying to understand football managers, there's no richer source than the actual manager's interviews himself. And luckily, in England, the coverage is fantastic. Local football clubs, we're so lucky to have 92 football clubs and all these passion around all these towns around the country that, these YouTube channels getting all these hits off a manager interview every Saturday evening. And this local media coverage is fantastic. It's such a shame, really, that, it's struggling so much, that local media, because it's there's so much gold there in terms of real signal for doing what I do, and I just see that there's so much signal in local media. And now I gravitate towards local radio stations and the post-match interviews. But previously, I used to love reading a local match report compared to a national newspaper version of the same match. So that's kind of it, really, for me. It's just getting as close to the source of what it is you're trying to actually study. And for me, football managers is no better place than actually listen to the manager talk themselves.
Similar to me, really, because I watch as many trainer interviews and read as many trainer interviews and comments as possible. And over time, I'm building up who I can rely on to when someone says they make an excuse for a horse, or if they're saying a future target, can we believe that that's the case enough to back it anti-post? And learning as we go on. Fascinating, really. With your edge in particular, Mike, I guess now you're always pitching yourself against the data, which is ultimately what's creating the prices for the markets. And you've been at that stage of the journey as well with the data. So do you ever think we'll get to a stage in the future where the original markets won't be formed purely through data, or have we gone too far in that respect?
I might be completely wrong about this, but in my head, the way I imagine it, I just think we've had a 20-year cycle of, offshore betting started 1999, Betfair 2000, early 2000s. It was only natural when that kind of liquidity and money and stuff was available, and then the Asian handicap markets and the Moneyball story come out. We've just been on an inevitable journey for 20 years towards science, to the point of just saturation. And I think the next cycle is going to be the same, but artistic methods and human intuition. It's only in the past 4 or 5 years would I say that the markets have been purely data driven and haven't followed old methods and old ways of pricing up matches. I think it's the last 4 or 5 years it's become really more sophisticated on a broader level, I think. And I think this is the beginning of the end of the data cycle, of the science cycle. And I think the next 20 years, starting, let's say, starting now, early 2020s, is going to be 20 years going towards human intuition. I think the people that are going to make money betting on football in the next 20 years are the people that understand psychology or understand emotional intelligence, which is a real big thing for me that I've come to understand in the past 12 months. That a lot of what personality psychology is teaching me is that people really don't understand emotions. I didn't understand emotions, still don't understand emotions, because I'm not really in touch with my emotions. I'm not very good with them. But there's this whole world out there that can be really made sense of. Emotions themselves aren't logical, but you can create systems to understand emotions. So, I think that's where the next 20 years, that's where the money's going to be made in betting, probably on all sports, but football's my window that I look at it through. And the thing is I think if I almost feel like if you want to change the world in football, give it to betting, because you give people the incentive to make money on it, like the Moneyball story, how Benham and Bloom have turned the Moneyball story into all this intelligence that now exists inside football. I think it's the punters that will find it first, because the incentives there, you've got your own incentives. You're not answerable to anybody else. You work for a football club, you're answerable to somebody. So, and you're constantly being watched over. But you give somebody a computer and a chance to make money betting on football and some new ideas that people haven't quite explored yet, well, you'll get the deep work out of the punter that wants to make his money. And then the football world will then try to take on board those new ideas. So there's all this focus around mental health now in football, but nobody really can, it's like football doesn't understand emotional intelligence yet, I don't believe, on a proper level. And when I say emotional intelligence, I mean, it could take forever to unpack it, to be quite honest, but I'm beginning to understand these concepts now, like trust and loyalty, and how you get buy-in from players, and where desire comes from, and how to motivate a team. These are kind of the avenues I'm exploring now, because I think that's where it all is. I think that's where the money is. Data will only tell you what past performances have done, and then you try to guess future performances, but it doesn't tell you anything about people and what's going on in people's lives. And if somebody's going through a crisis, you can't expect the data to continue as it was when the crisis suddenly hits, emotional crisis hits the dressing room or whatever, And I just think that's trying to understand all these concepts of emotional intelligence is going to be the next 20 years now, because I think we've pretty much got data science nailed. Football's got analytics nailed. And, it's like, all right, they're all trying to find marginal gains on each other, but they're all just playing the same game now. So the next club, the clubs that are going to find an edge in the next 20 years are the clubs that understand emotional intelligence, who employ the right managers. Or if you've got a very highly logical manager who really knows what he's doing, on the tactical side and the strategical side, have you got the right support network in place to emotionally support the players and the manager and make sure everybody gets their emotional needs met? And that's kind of where the future is, and that's what I'm looking to explore.
Brilliant. Some amazing insight there from Mike. I mean, I hope the Doubles and Trebles viewers have enjoyed the chat as much as I have personally, to be honest. We're going to put all Mike's info regarding the Foxpunter service in the descriptions below. If you want to check him out, I'd certainly recommend that. Someone like me who goes on there who didn't have a clue, there's a dead easy video. You just click it, and there's Mike. I think you're pretty much on the beach somewhere telling you what Foxpunter's all about. So that worked for me. So we'll put that below. But yeah, we're going to be, like Matt said at the start, there's a little bit of a mini series. So this is section 2, if you like. We're going to hopefully have four sections in total, which some will involve personality profiling, etc. And Mike's going to give us two, Matt and myself, a bit of a rundown on our personality types, which could be career ending for me, really. But it could be it would certainly be an eye opener. I filled the form in today, actually, and it was absolutely bang on. So yeah, as Matt said earlier, please do remember to like, comment, and subscribe, and we will certainly be back soon with some more content along these lines with our guest Mike Holden. So thank you very much.